Last year in January, Rachel White-Reed, who you may remember as the Turner Prize winning artist who did the inside of a house, in the 1990s, I think, made a revealing recommendation for the fourth plinth on Trafalgar Square. You probably know the fourth plinth on Trafalgar Square. It has a rotating kind of series of artworks. The current one is by a woman called Teresa Margolis, and it's, I think, something like 800 faces of trans and non-binary people. Her recommendation was not about its poor quality. It's not the most popular of rotating pieces of artwork, but she said that of the 14 or so that had been made in 28 years, no, I think one or two had found a permanent home. So they're mostly now all in storage. And I thought this is why I did a revealing comment about the work, but she then went on to say, and therefore we should just leave it empty. This was a sculpture person who has kind of committed herself to art, to making concrete and marble into meaningful, out of meaningful ideas, saying it should be empty. I think that's a really telling sign about our civilization that we are unable to give meaning in sort of artistic form to things that we find important, things that you might want to transmit onto future generations. And I think it's that counterpart to what we're seeing in terms of other acts of anti-civilization, which is the putting down of statues, the throwing of paint or soup onto artworks. These are all anti-civilizational acts, the ripping up of university texts and reading lists, the sort of acts of apparent decolonization that are ripping through our institutions. It's that sort of Western inability we have now to say what is meaningful, what is special, and turn it into marble. So my point is that Western civilization is in crisis. It's not a moral panic, but it's not so much under siege as it is corroding from within. And it's a process that's been going on, I would say, for decades. Not sure if you know that lovely book, Swallows and Amazons, written in the 1930s about children who are holidaying in the Lake District, and they take themselves away from their adult society onto a boat and they play with swallows and Amazons and all the rest of it. But at some point, they have to come home. They have to come back away from the savages to civilization. Bridget, the youngest, wonders aloud to her siblings, what is civilization? And her older brother says, ISIS, and all that sort of thing. And he's referring to ice cream. And I think, apart from being quite a charming thing, this tells us two things that are quite revealing. One, civilization isn't just great works, although it very much is that. Things like the Pont de Garde, the Roman aqueduct in the south of France, where you have kind of the improvement of nature and what is necessary, i.e., water for living, for life, the improvement of that distributed to those people, but with great kind of artistic and beauty, so improving upon nature. Yes, civilization is that, but it's also sort of the commonly taken for granted things, the ways of behaving in public on the bus, for example. It's the meal that you have with your friends in a convivial environment, and it's the ice cream that you eat after it. The other revealing thing I think about that book, which was written in the 1930s, is that we say this about many things, but you couldn't say that now. You couldn't say quite so easily civilization is ISIS, mainly because the very concept of civilization, in particular Western civilization, has been profoundly problematized. Civilization is seen as dangerous, as either associated with colonization or harm, but pretty much harming people. It's a bad word. It's not a recent thing, this. I think you see it in the 1960s and onwards, particularly in sort of identity movements, Black Panthers, and those kind of institutions that are beginning to work within the humanities start to talk about civilization as a problem. You see it in archaeology and anthropology in particular. Archaeology is seen as, and anthropology is seen as sort of harming people. So is it a question of confidence? Well, I think that lovely 1969 program, Civilization, that Ken Clark did talk about confidence. And I think he's got a point, but it also needs to be aligned with some sort of moral quest or sort of spiritual quest. The barbarians that destroyed Rome had confidence. They, had plunder. They had material progress, but they had no sense of trying to make something beyond themselves that would be enduring. They had, I think, a kind of spiritual whole. I think that's the sort of thing we have to kind of confront. Effectively, what has happened is this kind of anti-human sentiment that has kind of flourished now in our societies. You can see it in something like the idea of the human footprint. You know, when parents are first parents and they often get the footprint of their baby, and that is a sort of wonderful kind of idea that this child will go on to do something great, either in their own personal lives or have some sort of positive impact upon the world. It's a very nice idea, that sort of baby footprint. But now the human footprint is seen as an entirely negative thing. It's the carbon footprint that we all have to measure. Sort of any sense of human action on the world is seen as a negative thing. So, yes, it is a problem of confidence, but it's also a problem of really valuing our own humanity. My final point before Jacob shuts me up is to say, when the barbarians went into Rome, they only did so because Rome itself had already lost its sort of spiritual and political purpose. And that's why the danger to us that is really facing us is internal, not external.